This morning we're going straight away to Trinidad and Tobago, and I want to introduce you to the head of research, technical services and training at CariCRIS. CariCRIS in Trinidad and Tobago. That's the Caribbean Information and Credit Rating Services Limited. And I want to introduce you to Dr. Stefan Fortuné. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of the West Indies with the research interest in consumption behavior, welfare economics, and poverty alleviation. So I'll be talking to Dr. Fortuné for a while. He'll be explaining all about this organization, the rating system, how it operates, and so on. We know that recently there was a report out, the release came out from CariCRIS, regarding an upgrade in the ratings of the government of Anguilla by one notch to carry A, foreign and local currency, and an outlook rating of being stable. Firstly, Dr. Fortuné, could you just tell us a bit about the organization CariCRIS and the work that it does?
Sure. So you mentioned that you come into Trinidad, and that's true. I'm based in Trinidad. CariCRIS's main office is in Trinidad. We have a smaller satellite office in Jamaica, but we are really a regional credit rating agency. So we cover as far south as Suriname, as far north as Bahamas, and you could go west to Belize. We have a couple of ratings in Belize as well. So we've been around for quite a while. We started in 2004, and we really came out of a study that was done by a couple of academics around the region, where they were looking to see how they could advance capital market development. And we had the credit rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, Fitch, the big ones, that would operate in small ways around the Caribbean region. And we wanted to expand access to credit and credit rating information. So the idea was, well, we should do a regional credit rating agency where we look at the factors that affect all our regional economies, all our regional companies. We understand those factors, and we start looking at ourselves relative to each other. So the big credit rating agencies will be comparing us to large corporates in very large economies like UK and United States, etc. The idea was, let's look at ourselves compared to each other, and this way we would have a better ventilation of our credit strengths and weaknesses, and so money could start flowing, and loans could start being priced more based on the risk that we relatively face. So that was the impetus for the creation of the regional credit rating agency CariCRIS. That was in 2004, and in 2007 is when we became incorporated and we started our first credit ratings. A little on our shareholding. Our shareholding is very diverse. We have shareholdings from regional central banks. So we got the Central Bank of Barbados, Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, Central Bank of Suriname. We have multilaterals such as the IDB being a shareholder. The CDB as well is a shareholder. We have many of the commercial banks. We've got Republic Bank as a shareholder. We have shareholding from many of the First Caribbean International Bank, etc. So we try to keep our shareholding as diverse as possible, and with no shareholder holding more than 10% shareholding, so that they can't influence the credit ratings that we actually put out there. Because as we are trading on our independence and the accuracy of our credit ratings, we have to make sure that the users feel confident that we are an independent and transparent organization. So the shareholding itself is something that we try to keep as diverse as possible.
Is there any link, Dr. Stefan, with the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank?
Yes, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank is also a shareholder of CariCRIS.
Okay, fine. Let's move to the upgrade here. The upgrade ratings for the government of Anguilla by one notch to carry A, foreign and local currency, and the outlook being stable. This upgrade by one notch the ratings of the notional debt of US $25 million of the government of Anguilla to carry A, on the regional rating scale. Please explain and unpack this for us.
Yeah. So let me just explain that notional debt. That notional debt does not mean that the government of Anguilla is actually seeking to raise $25 million in financing. What it means is that when we are assessing the strength of the credit ratings, we would kind of pack on a debt of that quantum to see how strongly the macro factors continue to perform. So it's in some cases it's going to be an actual debt issue, and so we would be doing the credit ratings based on the credit rating, the issue of the entity. But in other cases, such as in government of Anguilla, we are taking on a notional debt perspective. So that's one thing I want the reader to be aware of. With regard to the upgrade for the government of Anguilla, what we were seeing is post Hurricane Irma, there was a concerted effort to recover some of the economic strength that was lost. And COVID-19 came about, and it kind of derailed things for a little bit. But what has happened post-COVID-19 was an even stronger rebound than we had anticipated. So the tourism numbers have come back quite forcefully. We've seen the fiscal recover as a result of that. We've seen in terms of GDP activity, not just the tourism activity, but ancillary activities have also recovered. And so the fiscal, like I said, that has benefited because the government is now able to extract more revenues from a better performing economy, as well as there appears to be a sort of windfall that is happening for the fiscal accounts with domain registrations for the .ai Anguilla domain. And these factors have pushed, when we look at the debt servicing capability of the government, into a higher rating category. So debt to GDP has come down over the last 2 to 3 years, right? When we look at debt servicing, that has also improved. The UK debt metrics, there are 3 of them that the government must be in compliance or should be in compliance with. Prior to 2022, they weren't in compliance with two of those metrics. Now they're in compliance with, they're not in compliance with just one, and that's marginally so. So we've seen the debt servicing capability of the government increase tremendously. And so our credit ratings have moved upwards to reflect that.
What drives the ratings, Dr. Stefan?
The ratings are driven by 5 factors of analysis. So when we do a sovereign credit rating, we're looking at the income and economic structure of the country. So we're looking at the GDP activities and trying to see whether or not there's a certain level of robustness and strength in that. How has diversification been trending? What are the opportunities there are for the strength of the income and economic machinery? In that category, we'll also look at unemployment. We'll look at labor force statistics, etc. So that will be the one category of analysis: income and economic activity. Another category of analysis would be the fiscal policy, the fiscal behavior of the government. We'll look in that regard as an outcrop of that, the debt sustainability and the debt management framework. We would also look at the monetary policies of the country. In the case of Anguilla, it would be the policies that's been set by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. We look to see the strength of the financial sector, because that could be a big fiscal burden eventually if the government needs to step in and recapitalize a bank, etc. So we have to look and see how strong the financial sector is performing and how stable it is. That's a 3rd area of analysis. A 4th area of analysis would be in terms of the external market, the balance of payments. We look to see how strongly the country is able to earn foreign exchange and where the spending on the foreign exchange is going. And then the 5th area of analysis would be on the political stability of the country. And together, those 5 areas form the driving factors that would determine our credit rating. Now, each one of those factors isn't equally weighted, because as you can imagine, if a country is at a debt to GDP level of, let's say, above 100%, and their challenges meeting their debt obligations as they become due, that is going to weigh much more importantly than if the country has a booming industry in manufacturing, because that hasn't been flowing towards containing the debt challenges. So we have to weigh things as they rise in importance for debt sustainability of the country.
So, Dr. Fortuné, here's a question: how do you control debt accumulation and improve debt servicing and improve the debt servicing capacity?
Well, debt accumulation, it's going to be a function of the fiscal behavior. So as much as there can be prudent approach to fiscal behavior, you're going to find your debt numbers behaving likewise. So you want to be collecting your revenues, not creating too many exceptions. And then on the expenditure side, you don't want to be supporting state-owned enterprises that really could be something that the private sector takes up. Wages and salaries have to be prudently managed. And so in terms of debt sustainability, you want to firstly look at your revenues and your expenditures. The second thing I would say is look at how the debt is actually being acquired. So you're looking to make your debt as long-term as possible. You don't want a lot of short-term debt that every 6 months you have to be trying to find money to repay this or to roll it over. So as much as you can make your debt long-term, that's going to be beneficial for debt management. Then you also want to make sure that a lot of your debt is at fixed interest rates, so that when we see, as we have seen in the past, interest rates going up, you're not struggling to make interest payments because now you're having higher interest rates that you didn't anticipate. And the third thing I would mention is also making sure that the currency is of a nature that it's easily accessible to the country. Now, this isn't too much of a challenge right now for Anguilla because its debt is either in EC dollars or US dollars, and there's a fixed exchange rate and you have enough reserves. But in other times, if you were to get debt in euros or some other currency, you got to make sure that you have the capacity, the earning capacity of that currency to repay that debt. So those are some of the things I would speak about for debt management.
Now, what are some of the factors that would temper the ratings? And I could give you one off the top of my head. For example, high non-performing loans.
Yeah. So in our rating report, you would see what you had mentioned it at the top of the hour, rating sensitivity factors. So these are things that, should they occur, would either raise the rating or, as per your question, reduce or could reduce the rating that we have assigned to the government of Anguilla. So the rating sensitivity factors, as we have identified in our report for Anguilla, would be, let me just find the rating sensitivity factors here, sorry. One you mentioned would be the high non-performing loans. Another one, also related to the financial sector, would be the level of capitalization of the financial institutions. Because while it has gone up in the last 12 months, it's still not at a very comfortable level. You're talking about barely 13%. If it drops below 7 or 8%, any shock to the financial sector could result in banks not being adequately capitalized, and then the government would have to, in some cases, the government may see it necessary to step in, recapitalize the banks, and that causes a fiscal challenge for the government. So those two would be the large rating sensitivity factors that I would want to identify here. The other one we have in our report is an increase in debt to GDP above 70%. I don't think that is realistic for the government of Anguilla over the next 2 to 3 years. Debt to GDP has been heading downwards, and this one is really something that I would say is not only the near-term horizon as a sensitivity factor.
What about
the one we have identified in our report? Sorry.
Yes. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, the final one that we have identified in our report, and this is something critical for the reader and the listener to understand, is that the credit ratings of the government of Anguilla are very dependent on the strength of the relationship, the strength of support that it gets from the United Kingdom. So if there were a change in the status of the country's relationship with the United Kingdom, and the level of support that we expect as a credit rating agency is diminished or removed completely, then that would change the credit rating negatively of the government of Anguilla. So that would be a final factor that could change the credit rating. Which
begs the question, what's the basis for the stable outlook rating that you've given, CariCRIS has given?
Yeah. So, again, in our report, we do have a paragraph where we speak on why we have assigned a stable outlook. Let me just read that paragraph for the listeners. So the stable outlook is based on strong fiscal and debt management support from United Kingdom. Again, the United Kingdom has set certain debt benchmarks that the government of Anguilla should attain. And as much as those benchmarks are there and the government of Anguilla is working towards being within those benchmarks, the credit rating of Anguilla should be stable. So that's one reason, based on the strong and fiscal and debt support from the United Kingdom. In addition, we have seen ongoing satisfactory recovery path, and we expect growth of 6.4%, I believe, in 2024. And a slight moderation in 2025, but again, it's on a growth path coming out of Hurricane Irma and then the COVID-19. So we're seeing that steady growth, and that leads to stability in our credit rating as well. And we are looking at the growth in the tourism industry, and there are a couple infrastructure works that are being done to support that growth, and that has impacts on the wider economy as well. So we're looking at stability with debt, we're looking at stability with GDP performance, and for that reason, we think that the credit ratings are not being threatened right now.
So, Dr. Fortuné, let's drill down some more here on the rating sensitivity factors and factors that could lead to an improvement in the ratings and or the outlook. I want you to just explain that for the benefit of our listeners, please.
Right. So we spoke a little on the sensitivity factors that could bring down the credit rating. Three factors that we have identified that if they were to occur over the next 12 to 18 months would result in an uplift of the credit rating, would be annual GDP growth in excess of 5% sustained for at least 2 years. And like I said, we expect some good performance over the next 2 years. So it could be that the credit ratings of Anguilla trend towards an upgrade situation when we review next year. Not really an upgrade outright, but a positive outlook. That is something that I could see happening. We also have, in terms of an improvement in the credit rating, a fiscal surplus of more than 5% of GDP for at least 2 consecutive fiscal periods, with no breaches in debt metrics. As I mentioned, the government is still in breach of one debt metric and is expected to be in compliance by the end of 2026. So this is another one where it's trending positive towards perhaps another upgrade situation. And the final improvement rating sensitivity factor would be meaningful diversification of the economy into sustainable productive sectors. That is not directly related to tourism, which adds at least 10% of GDP over 2 consecutive years. Now, this one, I think, is much more difficult to achieve because this is about getting meaningful diversification, which has always been a struggle for our regional economies. There are a number of opportunities I think that Anguilla can take advantage of, such as the large sea acreage that it has, and maybe some having fishing licenses, and so having the agricultural and fishing sector take off. They're both building opportunities as well. So everything related to marine, I think there are a lot of opportunities for Anguilla, and this could be an area that they do achieve this upgrade factor. But this one is the most difficult, I would say, to achieve, because it represents a kind of fundamental transformation of the economy, and that is always a difficult challenge. And
I want you to zoom. Sorry, Dr. Fortune, go ahead.
No, I think we spoke about the downgrade factors, which was an increase in debt to GDP above 50%, a change in the country status from as a British overseas territory, and then we had spoken about the banking sector capitalization falling below 8%. That is also something that would trigger a review of the credit ratings negatively if it should occur.
Speak to us about construction and tourism, the main sources of economic output, and what you're seeing, what your numbers and your research and work has been showing in relation to Anguilla.
Yeah, well, if we look back at 2023, we saw that there was significant growth in the hotel and restaurants sector. There was a 62.6% increase in the number of arrivals in 2023 over 2022. And this led to, visitor expenditure expanding by upwards of 20%, 21.8%. We see thus far for 2024 that the tourism numbers have been trending upward again. And so the season seems to be quite strong, and tourism seems to be a strong blossoming industry. What is driving that, as per our analysis, is the increase in accessibility of the island. So we had the Blowing Point ferry terminal that has reopened, so the sea access has strengthened quite a bit. And then when we look at air access, there are greater availability of flights. We expect that American Airlines will continue this winter, December 2024 to 2025, with its 2 direct flights that it currently has, but it would add another one for 3 flights, and this is direct linkage between Anguilla and Miami. We see Sky High Aviation that we expect that to continue operating between Anguilla and the Dominican Republic, and Win Air does do connections from time to time. There's also been some increased interest from Caribbean Airlines. All of these are going to add to the accessibility of the island and promote the tourism activity. In terms of construction, the construction we've seen is a lot of it is being related to the tourism product. Some marina projects, heritage tourism projects. We're seeing that there are some major tourism works in some properties, the Altamar, Aurora, the Four Seasons, Frangipani, and the Aini private resorts. So all of these are pointing towards a kind of a blossoming activity in tourism product, and then related to that is the construction activity that is responding to meet that tourism demand.
And now we have the external shocks. Anguilla's economy highly vulnerable to global macroeconomic shocks. How do we deal with that? What's your take on this, and how should Anguilla prepare for such, given what is happening in the global economy? For example, the high international oil prices, the occasional impacts from hurricanes and storms and the like.
Yeah. This is a challenge that all our islands face. You've got to save for a rainy day. And I know that there was, in years prior, a usage of the reserves, the reserve funds that the government had to support a stability in the economy while these shocks and the waves of these shocks pass through. There has been a build back up of those reserves. So as much as there can be savings from the normal fiscal operations for rainy days, that is going to be of benefit. Also for Anguilla, like I mentioned before, what we're seeing is a bit of a windfall, a fiscal revenue windfall coming from the domain registrations. So the government should really put plans, and they have been working towards putting plans to save some of those revenues. And again, that is going to be a kind of rainy day fund, as well as much spending on the capital expenditure. So you don't want to push all these revenues into a recurrent expenditure where it's going to just build up what is the expenditure that is going to occur, not just today, but tomorrow. Wages and salaries going higher. You have to pay that for the foreseeable future. Goods and services, you're buying a lot more items. That you can't really reduce those things quite easily. So those are not the kind of expenditures you want to have when you're having this sort of fiscal windfall. You want to spend more on your capital expenditure, putting in physical infrastructure, putting in digital infrastructure, stuff that could really increase the GDP machinery of the country, so that as shocks come by, you are now in a better position to weather those shock waves. So that's one of the things that I would recommend in terms of external shocks. Now, another part of external shocks you mentioned quite correctly is the number of hurricanes that we see. To prevent those shocks becoming, of a great magnitude that it causes economic derailment, you should be the country should be putting in climate and hurricane resistant infrastructure, as well as, and this is something that the government of Angola has been doing quite well, putting insurance in place so that should these shocks occur, there are insurance payouts that could help get the country back on a good path.
Now, Dr. Fortune, some comparative ratings, if you have any, with other Caribbean overseas territories in particular, but even the wider independent states in the Caribbean. So, for example, those close by in the 𝗏𝗧, St. Kitts, even Antigua, St. Lucia, Barbados, Trinidad, Jamaica, Guyana. Any comparative ratings you could share, as I said, specifically with the other Caribbean overseas, UK overseas territories?
Yeah, we do have opinions on all Caribbean countries, because you would appreciate that a credit rating, especially a credit rating of the CariCRIS nature, is going to be comparative to issuers in the Caribbean. So we have to have that kind of full, comprehensive, panoramic view on credit ratings. However, in terms of sovereigns, we have just 6 that are publicly available for the Caribbean. Luckily, one of them is another British overseas territory, which is the British Virgin Islands. And we have them rated at CariAA-. So they're higher rated than Angola, which is at CariA-. They are AA-. And they both territories benefit from the support of the UK government. There's no change in how we see that. What we see as a difference is that the economic machinery of the British Virgin Islands is in a better state than Angola, because it has a twin pillar economic activity. It's not just reliant on tourism. They have a quite well built out and renowned financial services sector. So they have offshore registrations, and that has been something that we've been doing for decades and decades. And for that reason, they are better rated than the government of Angola, because now if something were to happen to the tourism product, they also have their economic, their financial sector, which kind of pulls along and make sure the economy doesn't completely derail. And so that is one comparative. Let me run through the other 5 that you could compare with. So we have Trinidad and Tobago, which is CariAA. Trinidad and Tobago's economy has benefited a lot from the oil and gas sector. That sector is going through some challenges for that country. But by and large, they've got not only the primary extractive activities of the oil and gas industry, but they also process petrochemicals. And that does lend a level of economic diversification. Outside of energy, they do have a strong non-energy sector with financial services, manufacturing, and they do find ready markets for the manufactured products throughout the CARICOM. So that was, I think, majority explanation for why Trinidad and Tobago is CariCRIS rated. We have Barbados at CariCRIS. Barbados has had some challenging years in the past. They're under 2 IMF programs right now, and those programs are really bearing fruit. So we did upgrade Barbados last year, December, I believe, and now they're back up into investment grade category. So let me just explain for the listener that for our credit rating definitions, investment grade is BBB minus and above. So Anguilla is investment grade in the Caribbean rating scale. Barbados was below investment grade, but now they're BBB minus, and so now they've finally reached the cusp out of what we used to call junk credit ratings, below investment grade ratings. They're now just past that level. So Barbados has been doing well under their transformation program and the IMF guidance. St. Lucia, they are CariCRIS minus. St. Lucia has come down over a number of years, and the challenges there would be the accumulation of debt. Debt to GDP has really it rose quite significantly, not just even pre-COVID-19. And there's some challenges getting it down to below 70. It's kind of stalled between 75% to GDP right now. And for that reason, the fiscal challenges, they are at CariCRIS minus. And Dominica is at CariBB. Dominica has had some developmental challenges. They're building out their tourism product. Debt to GDP isn't as quite as high as in St. Lucia, but given where their economic activities are, it should really, for sustainability purposes, be a bit lower. And for that reason, they are CariBB. So those would be the 6 comparator countries that you could look at. Just to reiterate, British Virgin Islands, CariAA minus, Trinidad and Tobago, CariAA, Barbados, CariBB minus, St. Lucia, CariBB minus, and Dominica, CariBB. So Anguilla is right in the middle of the pack, but trending upwards.
Now, in terms of the fiscal planning done within within Anguilla, you noted in your report that continues based on the key debt performance metrics agreed with the UK. But cited in your report, you've cited that a rise in total revenue and grants. How and why? Taxes on income, for example, profit and capital gains declined by almost 6% to EC 18.8 million. Loss made up for by a 6.4% increase in goods and services of $195 million in collections. And we're getting into the GST a little bit more now.
Yeah. So the fiscal has benefited, like I mentioned, from maybe two items that you want to highlight would be one, the first full year of GST collection. And the second thing would be the non-tax revenues coming out of the AI domain registrations. So those 2 things have supported what we would look at would be an increase in some of the expenditures. So we saw wages and salaries go up a bit in terms of a reinstatement of past salaries where they were at. And given the revenue space, it did allow for that sort of increase, as well as we saw capital expenditure. And this is where I say the prudence in the spending is really occurring, in that capital expenditure is expanding quite a bit with the revenues, with the expansion in the revenues. Now, that's not a bad thing. When you hear increase in expenditure, you might get a little worried, but look at the quality and the type of expenditure. This is capital expenditure. This is stuff that you're spending today for future gains. And so that is where I said the prudence is really happening.
And I note in the report as well that your GST revenues were the largest component that climbed to 167.8% to EC 143.8 million. These are the 2023 figures, which, as you just said, represent the first full year of the GST collections. And you also noted that citizens benefited from inflation relief concessions. The .ai registration contributed EC 120.24 million in 2023, and that was used to support significant capital expenditure. I'm just quoting from your document. Yeah. Now, in terms of Anguilla's debt to GDP in 2023, share with us that information.
Yeah, so debt to GDP did come down for the year. It improved to 25.7% from 36.0% in 2022. Our information is that there are no new borrowings that are required for 2024. So we expect debt to GDP to come down as well for this year. Now, that is as anticipated, because if you look at the fiscal numbers, the fiscal is promoting, is showing that there are primary surpluses that are being earned by the government. So that means when we look at the excess of the revenues over the expenditures, and when we add to those expenditures, or when we remove from those expenditures the interest expense, we're still seeing that the government surplus is larger than what they would be adding on in terms of debt, interest expenditures. So we're seeing that the primary surpluses are continuing, and so the debt would gradually be coming down. We're looking at the not just the primary surpluses, but the overall surpluses, and that is still in surplus. And so again, there's a stronger decline in the quantum of debt. And as much as the quantum of debt is coming down and GDP is rising up, you're going to get that debt to GDP ratio declining. And that's something we saw over the last year, and we expect to see in 2024 as well. And my expectations is that it would be something similar in 2025. So debt to GDP is really on a good path. That's not the only metric the credit rating agency would look at. We would also be looking at those debt sustainability metrics. Those three benchmarks, I think, are good and crucial ones that a reader would want to keep their eye on. And we have seen, and you could read it in our report, and you'll see the table in our report, we have seen those debt management metrics trending in a positive direction over a number of years, and we expect that to continue. We expect that the third benchmark metric would be in compliance by 2026. And so the debt situation is quite manageable, quite sustainable, and trending quite positively for the government of Anguilla.
And you've said, Dr. Fortune, in your report that the fiscal position of Anguilla continues to improve, which gives a better, which factors into this, the greater fiscal space. And what can this all tell us here in Anguilla in terms of the advantages of having this greater fiscal space?
The advantages of the greater fiscal space is just as the inflation concessions occurred in the last 12 months. Those are some of the things that the man on the street, the citizen, could expect to benefit. If the government is increasing its revenues and it doesn't have to increase taxes, then it could find ways where it could benefit those that are going to be most impacted by external macro factors. So inflation is hitting people hard. The government has a certain level of tax windfall. They can now redirect some of those revenues to help the man on the street, the one that is suffering the most. So that's one of the benefits. The greater fiscal space now allows for more expenditures on those particular activities, such as the capital expenditure, building infrastructure, putting in digital government services, promoting digital services throughout the economy. Those are some good benefits that the fiscal space is going to allow. Also, the fiscal space is going to allow for diversification efforts, because now the government could go towards supporting economic activity that would have been much more difficult in the past if it didn't have the revenues to do so. So now they could start supporting registrations of within the special economic zone. They would have supporting revenues to support those type of diversification activities. It could go to supporting farmers. It could go to supporting fisher folk. All those things are going to be the benefit of this increased fiscal space.
Now, if we may look now at the backbone of your organization a bit more, I want to look here now at things like your code of conduct, your analytical firewall, policy and withdrawal of credit ratings and the like. Let's start with the CariCRIS code of conduct. Share with us a bit of information on this.
Yeah, so our credit rating agency is recognized by a couple jurisdictions. We're recognized within Trinidad and Tobago, we're recognized in Bahamas, and we're recognized in Jamaica. So what that means is that we have to uphold a certain level of credit, a certain standard of activities, a certain standard of looking at our methodologies, a certain standard of transparency and governance. So these standards are really set by our adherence to what is called the 𝗖𝗿𝗶𝗱, the International Security Council organization. They have guidelines that credit rating agencies are supposed to abide by, which would govern how often they look at their methodologies to make sure that the methodologies are accurate and able to assess what they are trying to assess. It looks at our rating setting committees to make sure that they are independent and not unduly influenced by either financial sector interests or their own personal interests in terms of shareholdings, etc. So that there's going to be those kind of controls and firewalls around who is allowed to do what sort of activities. So on our website, we do have shared the policies that go towards supporting our 𝗖𝗿𝗀𝗋 compliance. We also have linked to, on our website the link to the 𝗖𝗿𝗀𝗋 code of conduct for all credit rating agencies. This isn't something that only CariCRIS adheres to. S&P, Moody's, Fitch, all of us are going to have to. We try to adhere to these things, because this is the standard setting for the industry. So I would encourage everyone to check out our website, look at the 𝗖𝗿𝗀𝗋 code, look at our policies that go towards meeting those 𝗖𝗿𝗀𝗋 code standards. And it's something that we intend to maintain, because we want to keep that sort of recognition that we currently have by the regulators in Trinidad, Bahamas, and Jamaica.
Conflict of interest policy and your dependence on third parties. How does this all work with your organization?
Our rating committee, and let me just, I would get to the broader discussion on that, but I want to say that our rating committee is quite different from what you would see in other credit rating agencies. So in credit, if you were to look at a credit committee, this is a committee that actually decides on the credit rating. So in Moody's, in Fitch, in S&P, they would be made up of persons, of managers who wouldn't have worked on the case but are still employees of the company, right? No, I'm not saying that leads to any kind of conflict of interest, but it can open up more opportunities for conflict of interest. Now, in CariCRIS's case, our credit rating agency, and again, these are the people who actually decide on the credit ratings. Myself and my team, we only recommend credit ratings. But the rating committee, who are experts in various fields, financial and academia around the region, they are the ones that decide on the credit ratings, and they're completely external to CariCRIS. They're not employees, they're not former employees, etc. They are external persons, and they're the ones that would decide on our credit ratings. So there's a reduced opportunity for those conflict of interest to arise.
Your work with regulators in the region, and also if you could share with us a bit on your whistleblower policy, which I find very interesting.
Yeah. So in terms of work with regulators, we have to constantly keep dialogue with what the regulations are for the financial services, because not only do we have to make sure that our methodologies and our processes align with that, but also to make sure that to advocate for the greater use of credit ratings in terms of how companies like insurance companies and banks could hold securities on their books and increase the level of capital market development in the region. So we work with the regulators so that they understand the type of output that credit rating agencies actually produce, as well as how the insurance companies, the banks can use that output to be better able to lend to companies and those that need financing. So it's a developmental sort of activity that we are engaged in with the regulators. Now, the whistleblower policy, again, this is something that is standard from the 𝗖𝗿𝗶𝗱 code. We do have, as employees of the company, we have processes and access directly to the board in case we are unduly influenced by anyone in management. If we are being unduly influenced by external parties, there's that direct access to the board where they would have hearings, etc. And so it's all in an attempt to make sure that we have that level of transparency and that level of independence, because at the end of the day, credit rating agencies, we are trading on the quality of our credit ratings. If we lose that reputation, then it's only a matter of time when we will have to close up shop.
Now, how do you treat with complaints and the whole question of this big one, confidentiality?
Yeah. So complaints could come in a number of forms, right? So one of the ways I will deal with one first, which is the complaint about the credit rating assigned. So we do have a process where if an issuer is not happy with their credit rating, they can lodge a formal challenge to it. They would have to present what new information or what did we get wrong in our analysis, and then there's opportunity for us to retake that renewed or amended report to the rating committee to see whether or not the rating committee is in agreement that there was an error made in the credit rating assigned. So there is a channel for complaints about the credit ratings to be addressed. So that's one level of complaints. Another level of complaints, I don't know if you're referring to the conflict of interest, undue pressure to assign certain credit ratings. And so, again, that points us to the whistleblower policy. If there's anything that if we see someone acting in a manner that there isn't integrity, we can raise that ourselves to our board of directors. If there is pressure that is being put on us to assign a credit rating in a particular way, again, there are official channels by which we raise that to the board of directors, who are, like I said, independent of the management of the firm. No one holds over 10% of the shareholding, and so we have a very well represented and independent board of directors, and they would advance in terms of remedying any of those complaints. So that's how we'll deal with it.
Confidentiality.
Yes, confidentiality. So as part of the rating process, a lot of information will be shared with us that is of a confidential nature. We have teams that are assigned. We have Chinese walls between our research team, our ratings team, as well as the various activities in the rating assignment. So who's working on what? If somebody's working on one case, they're not allowed to work on a similar case. On a similar case that would have opportunities for the information to be nefariously utilized. So we have these Chinese walls that we've developed in terms of the team structure that helps with the confidentiality of information. Also, in terms of the storage of information, everything is electronically stored in the cloud and on secured servers. Access to the information is controlled by an independent IT department, right? Who are only able to grant access to persons as per instructed by the heads of the various departments. So I would say I give person A or B this type of access, and so they would only have that access to files of related to the work that they're working on. So we have these Chinese walls, we have the independence of our IT departments. Things aren't being stored anymore. Back in the day, we used to store things in binders and folders. Those have all been, scanned and put onto the cloud. So we have the cloud storage with a number of controls and firewalls that protect the information. In terms of the information that goes into the credit report that goes public, some of it will be confidential in terms of that we have to raise it with our rating committee so that they have the totality of knowledge to make the credit rating decision. But at the end of the day, before our report goes public, it goes to the client who can say, well, this is confidential, this is actually strategy, we don't want that shared because our competitors could use it. And once it's not critical to the rating analysis, we would take it out. So there's a lot of control that the client would have in terms of anything confidential, so that they feel assured that when we go out with a report, it's only stuff that the public should know.
And finally, Dr. Stefan Fortuné from CariCRIS, again, just give us a quick synopsis of the upgrade on the government of Anguilla's ratings by 1 notch to the Cari A- foreign and local currency, and the stable outlook that you've published.
Yeah. So I want to encourage your listeners, if they are interested in getting the credit rating report, to visit CariCRIS.com. Have a search for we have got the search search options. They could search for the Government of Anguilla report and download it and have a read of it yourself. But what we have, the upgrade was really driven by something that's been happening for a while, which is the post-hurricane recovery. It was a little derailed by COVID-19, but subsequent to that, the recovery has been stronger than anticipated. Tourism has been rebounding post-COVID quite strongly. We're seeing the construction infrastructure going towards supporting that. We're seeing the increase in accessibility to the island, also supporting the tourism demand. As tourism is growing, you're seeing other activities grow in the economy. So GDP is blossoming quite well. When we look at what's happening on the fiscal, the government is able to extract a lot of revenues, which go towards supporting capital expenditure. And this is stuff that you want because it helps with future periods of economic activity. So you want a lot of spending on your capital expenditure. And the government is able to do that because the GDP activity is supportive of the higher revenues. We are also seeing that non-tax revenues coming out of the AI domain registrations are also quite strong, and that goes towards supporting the fiscal space, the capital expenditure. And for these reasons, we thought the upgrade was warranted. And when we look at what is most critical for a credit rating agency, which is the debt sustainability, we're seeing that all of these things have translated into an increasing ability to manage and to repay its debt. We're seeing the debt benchmarks coming into compliance, and very soon our expectation is that the government of Anguilla will be in compliance with all 3 of the UK debt benchmarks.
Dr. Stefan Fortuné, the head of research, technical services and training at CariCRIS, that's the Caribbean Information and Credit Rating Services Limited, with main office in Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Fortuné, I want to thank you so very much for your time this morning. Thank you for the information, and we'll stay in touch.